Yeah.
The remedy of this is selfhood. You don't need another voice in your head or any instruction if you can rely on the imperial self within you.
Hmm.
The very last thing that the controllers want. That's why they send you to school early, right? That's why a lot of things are happening. That's why the kids are on their cell phones just gawking at them morning, noon, and night. That cell phone is going to be, eventually instructing you on everything that you want to do in life.
It'll be implanted in you. Yeah, yeah.
Probably
No doubt.
implanted, yeah. We're heading straight for that. And people
No, we're
will
not
not be
far.
forced. They'll be lining up.
Mhm.
They've been tenderized from it with all the video games and what have you, done for a long, long time.
Hmm.
And they've also been equally warned about it by other magnificent movies and stuff, but nobody's listening. So the remedy to it is, of course, selfhood. But who are the people around who are helping you develop your self-esteem? Who are the teachers around that are helping you delve into the significance of a self? Carl Jung was, right?
Hmm.
Ayn Rand was. There are a few others here and there, but generally speak, Crowley was. That's why I think he's a great man, and I
Yeah,
wrote my
yeah, yeah.
article on it. So I'm glad you asked about that because those 3 points I think are key. If a man is good, then he wants to learn about that goodness. He wants to uncover the mysteries of himself and the moral universe.
Hmm.
Therefore, you have occultism. It could be a way to restore knowledge of a golden age
Hmm.
that was taken from us abruptly, and like a smashed mirror, all these wonderful teachings and traditions were smashed up into millions of pieces. We're trying to put it all together, glue it all back.
Hmm.
That's what occultism is. Or it's a throwback to the bicameral period. I don't have the answer. I just present these 3, because in my research through the years, I've isolated these as being the most important.
Hmm.
And that doesn't mean that now you exclude everything else that could be said about it. But
Hmm.
through the years, these are the 3 outstanding categories that I put this subject into. When it comes to the origins of the occult.
Hello and welcome. My name is Matty, and this is the next episode of Vocation. Once again, I'm very pleased to announce I'm joined by the great Michael Tsarion, and today we're going to be speaking a bit about the occult as well as Aleister Crowley. Just to maybe start us off or set us up, would you maybe give us a few words of introduction, Michael, for the topic we're going to be looking at today, if that sounds all right?
Well, right. The occult goes back a long way, I think, to understand it. One can get lost in the activity of it, the ceremonial aspect of it. I'm more interested in its origin. And this would include subjects like magic, divination, and even the paranormal to a certain extent. They're all mixed in. But I think it's wrong to, like some people do, to date the word occultism and the phenomena of occultism from, say, Madame Blavatsky in the 19th century, and some people go back to the 16th century with, Cornelius Agrippa. Look, this is ridiculous. The occult was there at the building of the pyramids. We even have papyri back in Egypt, which contain spells, and they're quite clearly magical in nature. And you have the same thing in India. So this is a very, very age-old thing. And I don't know. We have a slide there, that slide I sent you. If you want
Yeah,
to show
yeah.
that, I can briefly, because I have to give you my approach, because there's so many ways of approaching this subject. But I tend to always break it down into 3 main categories of understanding. And these 3 are, for me, key. Now, there's like many more ways to approach the subject of the occult, but I'd like to break it down into these 3 categories. And they're not necessarily connected, although you can find connections between them. The first is this, what I call the pre-Adamite age. The second way to account for it is this bicameral age, which involves the work of the psychologist Julian Jaynes. We'll get to that in a minute. And then finally, there's a concept of the moral universe. So maybe we can cover those 3 in introduction, just briefly. The first one, pre-Adamite, what is that? Well, we've all heard about Atlantis, and I've written my first book on Atlantis, and that's what I'm really referring to, because in that book, I pick up the story of mankind from the foundation of Atlantis onwards to the present day, with only a very brief reference to what might have existed before the founding of Atlantis. And I don't necessarily believe that Atlantis was a particularly positive, establishment, so to speak. I think some very evil things went on. And this is not usually covered by anyone in the paranormal. You get a few people that sort of parallel my work. I think Zecharia Sitchin would be there. Some of his work is very, very good. I think William Bramley, who wrote Gods of Eden, and maybe a few other minor people. Those are the two big ones that I would follow in their tradition. But what about this earlier epoch? It was the epoch in which I believe our original archaic ancestors existed. This would be what's hinted at when you hear in Asia about the great yugas and the great golden age. A period that we know very little about. And the reason why we don't know a lot about it is because the civilizations that existed then were entirely wiped out. And this is what I talk about in my Atlantis book, picking up from that moment. And this involves, strangely, many, many things, the spreading of disease, but it also involves atomic war, the famous war of the gods that is spoken about in most of the mythologies of the world. But I take it so far as to say that this was a fairly deliberate act of mass genocide in which the world of our ancestors, these are our true human ancestors, was annihilated. And the ones who remained were genetically manipulated, giving rise to then, the post-Atlantean period, the period from about 13,000 years BC onwards. And it's well known that about 12,000, 13,000 BC, there was massive cataclysm, which has been noted. Many even roll-on effects after that. One day we might do something, that even talks about that. We're getting into these ages of catastrophe. But this one around 12, 13,000 BC was really monumental and worldwide. And it included floods, it included volcanoes, included perhaps even massive asteroid and comet behavior. But in my work, I say that a great deal of this was precipitated by humanoid action, a great war that took place that is in fact mentioned in the ancient records, what we have left of them. And one could discuss this, endlessly, this whole thing about the war of the gods and the aftermath. All we want to focus on now, because we're talking here about the occult sciences and the esoteric tradition, is to emphasize this point, that civilizations that had been going on this planet for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, were summarily wiped out. And so what I believe is the occult tradition, this is be moving in past that period, even moving up into the AD period and onwards, is a rather haphazard attempt for the post-Adamic man to try and piece together the immense gnosis that was known to our ancients. Can you read that Lawrence Gardner quote? It'll help to explain what I mean, please.
Absolutely. So this is the quote from Michael's website, michaeltsarion.com/Atlantis book. And this is the quote from Lawrence Gardner. It took man over 1 million years to progress from using stones as he found them to the realization that they could be chipped and flaked to better purpose. It then took another 500,000 years before Neanderthal man mastered the concept of stone tools, and a further 50,000 years before crops were cultivated and metallurgy was discovered. Hence, by all scales of evolutionary reckoning, we should still be as far removed from any basic understanding of mathematics, engineering, or science. But here we are, only 7,000 years later, landing probes on Mars. So how did we inherit this wisdom, and from whom?
So there you go. Now, in the Atlantis book, I answer that partly by just saying, well, it comes with the territory of the beings that visited us and genetically manipulated us. And I didn't, as I say, talk about what existed in the more archaic prehistoric world before that. But it's good to bring it out now in this context, that a great deal of why we were so advanced is because we are already descendants of something immensely advanced. And the existence of Göbekli Tepe, the ruins in Peru, the megaliths of Ireland, and of course, obviously the Great Pyramids, not to mention Stonehenge and what have you, is the proof of it. We have that in stone, and we have thousands of other anomalies all over the world. And this is part of the occult tradition because, of course, the secrets of what this was all about and who built it have been scrubbed. The powers that be know exactly, what happened. And they know all about the fall of the Arctic homeland, and they know about the existence and destruction of Atlantis and why it was destroyed and all the rest of it. But to narrow our focus again to the occult, we have to understand that what we call occultism is this haphazard attempt to reconstitute the ancient gnosis that is ultimately lost. What we're getting is piecemeal, but it is born from this idea that there once was a massive advanced civilization lost to time, lost to our ancestors, but the gnosis of it, that which was at the heart of it, beings like the Druids, beings like the Magi, the Chaldeans, the Egyptian mystics, they were trying to put this together. So this would be one of the answers. And it's rich. It's a rich answer, and you can follow it up. It explains a great deal when you dive into these different cultures and you look at what they were doing and how successful they may have been. Because you see, when I talk about this, I'm also including some of the world's great epic tales and epic texts, like the Upanishads, the Vedas, the Puranas, the Norse Edda, things like that. Some of the ancient mythologies that seem to just be strange and inexplicable. The ones of India even mention, you see, flying crafts and Vimanas and the War of the Gods and all of that, but so do many others, actually, when you know what you're looking at. So I'm not just including a strictly esoteric tradition of divination, magic, and herbalism, or whatever you want to add into the mix. I'm talking also about references. Because in divination, you also have to include things like astrology and pharmacopoeia, knowledge about herbs, knowledge about the body, knowledge even about the mind, and many, many other things beside. We have done innumerable, interviews on Unslaved where our guests have brought this out, things that just boggle the mind. So the occult tradition is a kind of a recognition in some way. Not that everybody practicing it is aware of what I'm talking about. These are my own theories. But this is what's happening, a recognition that there was high civilizations, their knowledge was lost, and there's a atavistic memory that sort of, we know that there was something marvelous there, and that we've had this devolution, this declination of wisdom. And some very smart people have probed back into it. This would include things like sacred geometry, for instance, sacred architecture, sacred numerology, such as you get in places like the pyramid, advanced astrology and astronomy, things that are absolutely so advanced, that where did it all come from? And as I said, if we think that it came from just the last 2,000 years, we're highly mistaken. Now, the question arises, have we even approached restoring and repairing what was of the ancient world? I don't think so.
Not a little, yeah.
No, nowhere near it. It's too scrappy. There's still too many mysteries, even in occultism. It's too broken up. One other thing I'll say in this part, is that when we had these ancient civilizations of this sort of a pre-Adamite world, I think we were visited many times by extraterrestrial beings who were friendly. Yep. And there was commerce between us on a fairly regular basis. But after the destruction of this planet and unspeakable cataclysms, visitors returned here expecting to find their friends, expecting to find our ancestors. And yet they find all of these mentally retarded people running around. That's us. And some of these visitations have continued happening. But every time that they've happened, especially in the more of the older world, ancient period, the visitors couldn't believe. It's like you go and, to a house of a friend that you knew, and they open a door and some gibbering idiots have moved in. And you're like, what the hell has happened here? We can't talk to these people. They don't know anything. So these alien beings who were used to visit here and be received in a friendly way and helped instruct our ancestors on how to build these magnificent cyclopean ruins, they just went into hiding. They said, we can't have any more interaction with these people, the ones who are here now. They're not our friends. They don't know anything what's going on. They've been dumbed down. They're like apes. So if and when we ever come back here, which is not going to be too frequent, but we may have to come here for other reasons, let's stay the hell away from the inhabitants of this planet. Something tragic has taken place. So this for me is where the paranormal ties in. Because wherever you go in the world, if you go to the Incas, if you go to the Aztecs, and all over the world, and you say, who built these ancient ruins? They go, oh no, we don't know. They were here when we arrived. I think the gods. Oh, everywhere you go, every tribe is only too happy to say, it wasn't our ancestors. We don't know. We've taken some of the stones we've built on top, which you can visually see when you go to Peru. The crappy building that they've done on top. It's all haphazard and, amateur. Yet underneath it, these foundations are inexplicable. Right? And some of it's just overgrown with forests. And now, nobody knows what to do with it. They haven't a clue. In Ireland, they've just been plundering these ancient sites and using them for their walls to keep the sheep in.
Yeah. It's sad, isn't it? Yeah, it's lack of recognition of it, but
yeah,
I know what you mean.
But this anecdote that they all said, others did this. And then when you look into what those others were, you find out that there was not only they believed in visitation from the stars, the star people, but also back to this point about cataclysm. In many of these key places, you will find necropolises and burial grounds where people have had their brains bashed out in hundreds and sometimes even thousands. Yeah. Buried corpses near these ancient sites have been dug up where that something horrendous took place. Yeah. They found people with elongated skulls, all buried in mass graves, higgledy-piggledy. They found them near the Anastasia ruins in Santa Fe in New Mexico. In fact, they found graves of hundreds and hundreds of children. They cover all this up, But if you know where to look, you'll find this out. The Smithsonian knows all about it. National Geographic. It has been published, but it immediately gets smothered, and it never reaches the mainstream. Yeah. So near. Look, how can you create those Nazca lines? You can't do it unless you have visibility from the air, and on and on and on. People know what I'm talking about. They've seen it on Ancient Aliens, and we know about these crystal skulls, and we know about a lot of these things. So this was another after effect. We did have alien intervention in those days, but they stopped coming. And if they still had to come here for other reasons, like mining, they sure did, but they stayed the hell away from us. And that's why you get sightings, all these sightings. But these beings don't want to be sighted. They come here for their own reason, and then they get the hell out. So that's what I'd say about that. So the occult, I believe, is an attempt to reconstitute a very ancient lore, which would be a well-meaning thing to try and do, of course. That means it's quite altogether a kind of a healthy thing. But you see, the trouble is that the evil forces that caused this destruction and then caused the genetic manipulation, they're also fascinated with that age that I'm talking about, this pre-Adamite age. I mean, they caused it to be destroyed, but guess what? When they later on found out that it too was a high civilization, they're interested in dipping into the past. They're interested in resurrecting some of that knowledge too. So this is where you get the black arts. This is where you get some very unhealthy people themselves dabbling into necromancy and what have you, right? It's not just the good. It's not just those people who care about humanity that have been dipping into this great well of ancestral knowledge. It also occurred to the descendants of these evil ones that, hey, yeah, we better start looking into this as well. And they have. So that would be, I don't know if you have any questions about that phase that we've talked about.
Hello. If you've been enjoying this episode so far, I would be very grateful if you would consider subscribing to Vocation. By subscribing, you will really help me keep this journey going. Thank you for your time. And back to the show. I have about 100 different questions on that topic, so I think we're going to have a lot to sort of spin off. I thought maybe there's maybe new people coming into this as well also that are a bit unfamiliar with the occult, so I thought maybe we'll take a step back for a moment, do a macro review of what the occult is, and then I guess we'll narrow down to all these different topics like alien visitation and past knowledge and things which will come along. So I'll put a couple of wee slides together if that's all right, to maybe frame it a bit more, and yeah, we'll dive deeply into this topic if that sounds cool, Michael.
Yeah, why not?
So yeah, let me call up a couple of the little slides and we'll take it from there. So again, we were looking at your main article here about Aleister Crowley and the Aeon of Horus. And so just to set us off here, when we speak about the occult refers to the study and practice of hidden, secret or esoteric knowledge, focusing on the supernatural or mystical phenomena that fall outside mainstream science and organized religion. Originating from the Latin occultus, meaning hidden, it covers traditions like alchemy and astrology, and all these things that you've sort of went into great detail about already. One of the entry books I find very helpful for coming into this was the work by Colin Wilson, probably one of our favourite authors here that we've mentioned a few times. And his book, The Occult, comes at it from a very sort of rational, humanistic kind of term. There's not a lot of like woo-woo thrown in there from the start, but it really helps to frame it from people here maybe a little bit more. Now, a part of the occult is naturally these mystery schools. So we understand that knowledge is power, and therefore the most powerful knowledge would likely be the most hidden. Knowledge was often passed down through master and student or adepts to initiates. And certain groups would naturally harbour certain knowledge, and they would pay a high price in order for this initiation to occur, to get them to get their hands on this kind of knowledge, then to keep outsiders away. Also, naturally, in this field, claims upon knowledge of the mysteries of the universe can be full of the most ridiculous assertions. Can be full of charlatans as well, also. However, it may be true to say that there are greater or lesser degrees of understanding of these great mysteries. And I really appreciate how you've sort of framed things so far about what some of these great mysteries might be. It's harkened back to a time before the last great calamity happened there about 13,000 years ago. But maybe even just to pause here for a moment, we've a lot to go into. Have you any thoughts on some of the most famous occult societies that there have been, or maybe what their initiation processes were like as well also, Michael?
Well, yeah, the thing of initiation is very, very key to this. And then the forming of certain societies, when they suddenly realized how immense this work was going to be, individuals realized that all the work that they might do in life to reassemble this ancient gnosis isn't going to be enough. So eventually it was decided, by all parties, even the negative side realized this. This is why they put together their collegiates. I talk about John Dee in my work, the Elizabethan magician who was employed by royalty, on the dark side. But even on the positive side, it was realized that, look, it's impossible for a single human being to do the work. So we have to put together these schools and these traditions. And then the next problem was, of course, how do you tell who's pure, who is eligible for this knowledge? You have to have the master-teacher scenario going on, which a lot of people would find already problematic. But I can see, of course, that when you're dedicated to this knowledge, there's going to be a mastership involved, and then there's going to be getting old. Who do we pass this on to, and how do we do it? The Druids are allegedly never wrote anything down. But even if they did, it's still going to be who is going to inherit this knowledge. So then they structured their organization into 3 to 4 parts. The High Druid at the top, the Druidic order itself, the bards, who had their specific roles, and then below that, the ovates. Used to be the vates, the vates. It's where the word Vatican comes from. And below that, you maybe had the sort of the minstrels, who would interact more with the people and sort of translate the lore of the higher echelons down into language that the ordinary illiterate person could understand. The minstrels played a very big role in those days, to translate into story form, into metaphor, into allegory. But again, the whole thing was initiation. If the minstrel found that some young people in the villages took more to his stories, became obsessed, you could see that they were really moved by it, he might recommend them, up the ladder a bit. Pick a particular child that showed a certain fascination to what was being told and had a particular skill. That kid would then, be maybe chosen for initiation. So I can see it working. Because obviously, if you're dealing with the kind of retarded types that I've just mentioned in the post-Adamic world, doesn't it make sense? You can't just deliver this information out. I've just made the point that the post-Adamic humanity was a very, very sorry, devolved situation. Yeah, and higher-ups didn't want people to get their dirty hands on it. Even in the Bible, it says, don't cast your pearls before swine. So I see a lot of sense in doing that. It's not that also can't be manipulated, and turned for bad purposes. But on the whole, I can see this meritocracy coming in that might indeed be a very valuable thing to impose upon people. Yeah.
Can you think of the top of your head any crazy stories of trying to be an initiate? So you go fight in the wilderness for 7 days, or go do some sort of death-defying feat, or was it just you speak, we'll kill you? That's sort of the way these things work. Yeah.
Well, this is where we come back to Ireland, because the most difficult trials of any group is not the Native American Indians or East Indians. It was the Irish, even in quite a latter day. Even in almost moving into the Gaelic period, the trials that a neophyte, an adept, had to go through were absolutely frightening, absolutely horrendous. Yeah, when you get down into the weeds of that, you had to be immensely eligible and skilled, and they had very elaborate initiatory rites to make sure that only the purest. Yeah. It's something that really is remarkable. I think that some of the Arthurian legends sort of hint a little bit at that, but you'd have to get deeply into the Irish mythology to tease that out more.
Yeah, I'll try to find a few examples for people for our next chat, maybe as a follow-up, just as an interesting side bit. But yeah, I'll maybe carry on with a bit more of these slides. So when we were speaking about, what kind of knowledge is hidden away, one of the common ones that comes up is this Kabbalah, this tree of life. And so we spoke about this a little bit before, but I thought it was worth going over once again. And so the Kabbalah is an ancient esoteric and mystical branch of Judaism focused on understanding the essence of God, the origin of the universe, and the soul's purpose. The Hebrew word literally means receiving, or tradition, referring to knowledge received through a chain of transmission. It is often described as the soul of the Torah and provides mystical interpretations of the text, featuring the Sephiro, or divine emanations as they're known, to explain how the infinite relates to the finite. Have you any comments there, maybe just as an overview first off of what the Kabbalah is, this tree of life? I think you mentioned it's related to the Druids once before. And then maybe, even if you want to speak a little bit about what it contains, if these Sephiro and things are, maybe that's worthwhile leaving to a separate chat to go into those deeper details, if that sounds...
Yeah, it's a very immense subject. I've written 2 volumes on it called The Trees of Life. And this is where you'll find the best extrapolation of tree symbolism that has ever been written. Even if I say that myself, I really highly recommend those books. See, the Kabbalah is not Jewish. it was tacked on to Judaism, because Judaism, just like Islam and Christianity, is basically a pastiche of older pagan lore. And so you find the word Kabbalah itself comes from the goddess named Kebel or Sibel. And it's all part of a goddess tradition, which again is, quasi-druidic, quasi to do with the pharmacopoeia and with tree symbolism. Because in Egypt, the goddess and the tree were inseparable as symbols. I show this in my book, 2 volumes, right? But it was the same in other countries as well. In Turkey, the great Aryan tradition there, there's another iteration of this, and the goddess of the garden was called, of all things, Aoife, just like Eve.
Aoife.
Oh, yes, and there was a guardian serpent. Then in the Greeks, we have the Garden of Hesperides, sacred tree with sacred fruit, and a guardian serpent. In the Norse myths, you've got Yggdrasil, the sacred tree, and you've got the guardian Midgard serpent. And in Ireland and in Mexico, you've got it all over the place. There's nothing Christian about it, and there's nothing Jewish about it. Now, the good thing about the Jews is that they just preserved it. It would have been probably lost to us, like so many things were burned, so many libraries, so many archives. But this part somehow got preserved. And sometime in the much later period, 15th century or whatever, AD, some Jewish scholars dug it up, didn't know what they'd got, and so started their own ruminations on it, which are usually superficial and just completely confusing, just like the Talmud itself. So the Kabbalah has nothing to do with the Torah or any Jewish traditions. That was a attempt to put squares into round holes. It doesn't fit. They know it doesn't fit, but they don't want to lose the reputation that it's theirs, for obvious reasons, right? It's not theirs. And a deeper dive shows you that it has nothing to do with these, it's just a hopeless mess. But because it was a tree, and originally it was a tree of 7 branches, clearly this then goes back to the older cults. And I write about those in those 2 volumes, and it goes very, very deep. This is the old Aryan teachings. Now, also, you see, the word Jew itself is misleading. In the mystery tradition, in the mystery rites, the word Jew turns up as a stage of initiation. It wasn't a religious caste. It was the state of a magi as he rose up through the ranks. It was a degree. When you reached a certain degree, you were known as a Jew. And it is a derivative cognate of the word you, from yew tree. And from it, and the god associated with the yew tree was Eua, or becomes Yahweh. Yeah,
fascinating.
It's hard to pronounce in English, but it's IHUH, and various variations like that. But because it was hard to pronounce, then it got transliterated down through time into Yahweh and Yahovah. But this was a tree god. Yeah. And those who were worshiping the tree god were known as the Judites. And also the Levites. Levite also comes from another tree. This time it's the worshippers of the Rowan tree. I go into this all in Irish Origins of Civilization. So a Levite goes back to a word Luvian, but also to Lewi, Lewi, which was another name of the caste of a particular branch of the Druid order. Yeah. And so words like Lewis, Louis, Lourdes, place name, and Lewisham, place name. It's very, very important. The Isle of Lewis up in Scotland. And this gave rise to a tribe called the Luvians, who moved into Babylon at a very earlier period, and later on are known to the Jews as the Levites, because we know that the Jews spent time in Babylon in the so-called exile? They did. Yeah. And they adopted the teachings of the priesthoods that they found there. And the word Levi, which is high priest in Israel, actually comes from this old Western Aryan tradition of the Levi, the worshippers of the Rowan tree. So this is why they picked up the Kabbalah. It's not theirs, but it's an old relic showing you where these Jews come from. As it does, they leave footprints. There's no hiding it. The coat of many colors. Joseph's coat of many colors is an old reference to the high druid, Yuya, Yosef. And when the Druids came over to Egypt, they wore a multicolored cloak. You see, so these are all footprints left in the text. And it's a good thing that they were, because those who then have the keys of decipherment can tell you all about it. But you have to go through it meticulously, so that's why I wrote those 2 volumes, to do that, so that there could be no error. Yeah, people are just going to say, where are you pulling this out from? It's not true, because you have so many cynics and you have so many trolls, you see. But when you do the proper work that I've done, then it leaves no sane person in any doubt at all.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely do a deep dive into the trees of life and into those articles and books to further expand upon this, no doubt. There's a lot here to chat about. I'll maybe carry on with the next slide as well too. When we're speaking about occultists and about famous occultists over time, I thought I would name a few people. This is not just some, random list of, nobodies that people would call occultists. This includes people like Isaac Newton, but Carl Gustav Jung was obviously obsessed with the occult. That was a big part of his work. You have Paracelsus, which you mentioned earlier as well too. Cornelius Agrippa was another name that came up. John Dee was one we also mentioned. This was Queen Elizabeth's chief occultist as well too. Johannes Kepler from 1571 to 1630. He was a famous astronomer and mathematician who formulated the laws of planetary motion. Jack Parsons from 1914 to 1952. He was a famous rocket scientist, co-founder of NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and inventor of solid rocket fuel. He was a devoted follower also of Aleister Crowley, he was a high-ranking Thelemite who performed ceremonial magical rituals and identified strongly with occult practices. And maybe a final name I'll mention here is Wolfgang Pauli from 1900 to 1958. He was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, pivotal in quantum mechanics and the exclusion principle. He collaborated extensively with Jung on synchronicity, archetypes, numerology, and alchemical symbolism to understand deeper cosmic patterns. And so one of the names that jumped out there when you speak about occultists was this Aleister Crowley, which is one of the names in your article you mentioned. So I thought I'd give a little bit of a background to him, then I'll pass it over to you, Michael. And so Aleister Crowley, born October 12th, 1875, and lived to the 1st of December, 1947. And this is a quote. This is from the beginning of your article. We'll leave a link down below for people to check out. And the quote reads, "I have been accused of being a black magician. No more foolish statement was ever made about me. I despise the thing to such an extent that I can hardly believe in the existence of people so debased and idiotic as to practice it." And he wrote that in 1933. So Crowley's life, Edward Alexander Aleister Crowley was his full name, and he was born under the sign of Libra, as we spoke about, which was also the same year that the Theosophical Society was founded. He was born to a family of fundamentalist Plymouth Brethren. He attended Cambridge University and read his first occult text, The Cloud Upon the Sanctuary, by Karl von Eckartshausen at age 22. On November 18th, 1898, he was initiated into the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, an occult fraternity founded in England by Dr. Wynne Westcott, William Robert Woodman, and Samuel Liddell, also known as MacGregor Mathers. I've heard of this Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Have you any comment on them, Michael, about their importance of the last century?
Yes, it was quite great. MacGregor Mathers is the one who stands out. He was the true occultist. I don't think much of the others, too much. But he certainly was a particularly brilliant man. And he is the composer of what is known as Book T. And the T stands for tarot. So he was a genius in his own right who helped organize the tarot cards. It's not that he got everything bang on, but he got things so right that basically it, and this was in the 1900s, early 20th century. So before that, the tarot was in a complete state of mess. Nobody knew what it was. The order of the tarot was wrong. The planetary assignments, all these different occult correspondences were just a pickle. Even when they were right, they were right only because of arbitrary, it's like a potluck. You got that right, but you don't really know why you got it right. So MacGregor Mathie's used some, rationality. His researches were for decades into the subject. And so this is where I think personally there's a great discovery. Now, when Aleister Crowley joined the Order of the Golden Dawn, he read Book T and fell in love with the tarot. And so both of these men, to me, this is where they really excel. You couldn't make sense of the tarot without this Book T. And Aleister Crowley then being fascinated with the book and also progressing up through these stages of initiation very quickly. He was brilliant. He then started working on his own tarot, the Thoth deck, for his own occult order, Ordo Templi Orientis, OTO, which already had been going, by the way, but he became the head of it. He didn't invent it. It was already an order that existed in Europe, and he was initiated into it. And it carries on to this day. But the Order of the Golden Dawn was very special, and I hone in for this reason. So they have some very interesting things, but this updating of the tarot was the most essential. So when you're reading their works, I find it interesting, but really when it comes to this part on the tarot, this is where the whole thing, takes another leap. And is particularly distinguished, I think. Not too many scholars acknowledge this, but that's because they haven't studied the tarot and they don't know just how banjaxed it was before that, to really marvel and really... Now, there is a book called The Western Mysteries by David Allen Holtz, The Western Mysteries, and that will walk people through what I'm talking about. So it's a very good resource to help people who are new to this. Because if you start studying the tarot, you're probably going to be studying tarots that are just also nonsense. They work only because they're artistic creations, but they don't have any particularly deep esoteric meaning. When I'm talking about MacGregor Mathers and what he did was that he reconstituted the esoteric meanings of the tarot. How many cards there should be, what order they should be. There's quite a lot going on there that matters. And Aleister Crowley followed in that tradition and in some ways even improved it. Right? There's a couple of things he did that I don't agree with, but those are kind of minor and you can correct those when you're working with his tarot. But he even went a few steps further than MacGregor Mathers, especially when it came to the court cards. So I have a mystery school in which I teach all of this, and we go into all of these positives and negatives. But the positives vastly outweigh the negatives, when it comes to this, because they brought it back to be a very accurate divination tool that can be used, in a proper way, not just some artistic deck, which is fine. I'm not against people doing that, but they shouldn't be passing that off necessarily as an esoteric deck. It's exoteric, what they've created. But the Rider-Waite, it's now called the Rider-Waite because A.E. Waite was involved in the production of it. But the theories behind it were basically this Book T. So when you joined the Golden Dawn, like A.E. Waite did or like Aleister Crowley did, you would be exposed to this incredible volume. And then MacGregor Mathers said, well, then, after you've read it, you can take it off on your own to do what you want. And that's exactly what happened. And we have these precious heirlooms. So this is how my interest in the occult, basically got started from that. Because when you really know your tarot, you are dealing with the Kabbalah as well. There's the right placement of the Hebrew letters. There's the right placement of numbers and other sigils, the symbolism of it, and so on, and then the interpretation of each individual card. All of this needs to be done in a sort of a systematic and, sane way. You don't get a lot of sanity. And so my work was to show how irrational all the other systems were. and I relied a lot on the Golden Dawn system. That was where I was coming in. My work on the tarot is basically an extension of that of McGregor, Mathers, and Aleister Crowley.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. We have a lot to go down in this topic with it. I'm sure we'll do future presentations off it as well. But just because you mentioned this Thoth deck, here's a photo of it for people. And again, this is also from your article as well too. The result of his education during his time with the Golden Dawn was his Thoth deck, as you mentioned. The cards were painted by Golden Dawn member and Freemason Lady Freda Harris. And I'm not my understanding of the Freemasons is that they study the Kabbalah quite a bit as well also. I went into a lot of work about Freemasonry with Ralph, where he speaks about, it sort of writes about this history of the United Monarch, which comes from the Old Testament as well too. But again, I'll leave a link for people to check out that episode. They can look that up. We've done that with Ralph a couple of times actually. But just to carry on with the article here, this is a quote about Lady Freda Harris, and this was written by Aleister Crowley actually. She devoted her genius to the work with inexhaustible patience, often painting the same card as many as 8 times. May the passionate love under will, which she has stored in this treasury of truth and beauty, flow forth from the splendor and strength of her work to enlighten the world. May this tarot serve as a chart for the bold seamen of the new Aeon, to guide them across the great sea of understanding to the city of the pyramids. And just one quick little note about the tarot for people who are maybe just not quite grasping it. I kind of see it as a way, as like a training manual or like a steroid for the right brain type of thinking in order to engage it, which is what the point of symbolism is a little bit to me. Do you have any comment on that, Michael, about sort of left brain, right brain, and maybe how the tarot sort of impacts upon an individual when they study it?
No, you got it right, 100%. That's its main usage is to stimulate the right brain thinking, which is more imaginative and intuitive. And the right brain is also a conduit to a deeper reservoir of ancient knowledge, which the left brain just does not have access to. This is the way it is. And so this, we were talking there once also about ancestral memory. You see, so these symbols on the cards are recognized. They're much more ancient than people realize. And we have an instinctual understanding from this right brain point of view. That's why some people love it and others don't. It all depends on the person. And so we are deeply caught in the left brain, but the right brain is the one that deals with art and images and image recognition. So absolutely, you're 100% right there. And yeah, it has many different levels, from just being good for meditation, for instance, but also, for astrological type divination. There's many applications that you can have for it. It was one of the keys. I actually believe it's the true Emerald Tablets of Hermes. When you hear people talking about the Book of Life, so-called Book of Life, or the Emerald Tablets of Hermes, I believe that the Emerald Tablets of Hermes is the tarot, by the way.
Yeah. That's so fascinating. And again, I think about right brain thinking for maybe new people coming into this. If you're not grasping these kind of divination arts logically and conceptually, it's because you're not fully meant to. It's meant to impress upon you, because consciousness is partly about feeling and about intuition. These are things we've spoken quite a bit about before, and so you should come into maybe some of this tarot work with that kind of framework as well too. See what it stimulates and let that come through, and that takes a certain kind of meditative mind. Maybe you can't be too busy and too distracted with life and go, oh, I'm just going to quickly pick up a card and expect, the mysteries of the universe to come to me. There's a ritual in place for these kind of things.
Yeah. And that's the point. See, these things can be considered just children's games or fortune-telling nonsense. Even the playing deck. The ordinary playing deck contains many esoteric secrets. But the beauty of it is no one needs to know that. These things can be, chucked on the shelf for an age, and everybody running around not even understanding what it is. That's basically what was happening. Yeah, this is what mystery is all about. This is how it works. Yeah. How many people remember their dreams that they've had all through their lives? Very little. A dream is the most disposable of things. You dream all the time. How many people really remember their dreams? Really? Dream after dream comes and passes by. You see? So there's part of our mind that is censoring content. Now, the tarot cards are one of these things that helps to reduce this censoring, editing component of the left brain. It slows that process down, helps us become more attentive to what I call symbol literacy. And we need that very much because of what's happening in our society from more of the evil side, where anything you could really call mind control and behavior control is done by symbols. I've been saying that from the beginning of my, career in this movement. So the man without symbol literacy, he is utterly, I don't care how many PhDs he's got or what he thinks of himself or how intelligent in other ways he thinks he is. He's completely a sheep under control. He's totally indoctrinated.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And that maybe brings me on to the next little bit, which is, the perception or the reception, more like, that Aleister Crowley got at his age and his time. And again, this is a quote from your article, Michael. Although he was born in the late Victorian age, there was little that was old world about the bohemian gentleman, perpetually slandered as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. As unofficial biographers are only too keen to remind us, Victorian society considered Crowley something of an enfant terrible. Alas, due to disinformation disseminated by gutter journalists, we found Crowley's name indexed not with the enlighteners and geniuses, but with the scoundrels and sociopaths. To read the many vitriolic diatribes against him and labels he was given, such as Antichrist, King of Depravity, Cannibal at Large, Wickedest Man Alive, The Great Beast, etc., one may be excused for thinking him related to Vlad the Impaler or Jack the Ripper. He has been labelled everything from England's most perfidious seducer to the devil's own high priest. And so it sort of speaks a little bit about the kind of reception that the occult gets or the tarot gets or what other people might react to you whenever you speak about these kind of things. Because again, they're just too left brain. They go, that's something evil that you're dabbling in. They just don't quite understand it, or they've just been told from another source that anything related to this is the devil's work. What sort of reactions have you had, Michael, when you speak about these subjects to people? And have you anything to sort of just comment on that generally with it? Yeah.
Well, what I've had, you mean?
And would you have had, and maybe just sort of your overall framework of like what people come into these kind of topics like and their reactions with it? Just anything that you can think of there. Yeah.
Yeah, not good. I fell in the gap because this is often associated with sort of a new agey type of practice, but I'm not new age. So I was never accepted by the new age. Not that I'm needing to be, right? I didn't want, the last thing I wanted was to be accepted by them. But when it came to being accepted, where you would be able to talk and have a practice, this was made difficult because I've been making criticism against the New Age movement since I started and in California. So this doesn't help you in your career. So I was basically hinterlanded because of that. Since almost everyone that I knew was 100% into the New Age movement, and should you say a word against it, especially as vehemently as I did, this would cost you, sorely. But what it did was it just forced me online. I stopped talking about it in public, and I put together my website, the Taroscopes Mystery School, to reach a global audience where you would be able to reach people who weren't so indoctrinated as you would get in somewhere like California, So in many ways, I'm glad. But the gap was also there because I wasn't accepted by Christians. Being into the conspiracy movement, about 80%, or maybe even more, in the days when I was into it in America, the greatest conspiracy theorists happened to be Christian. I'm not against it. I learned, do you know how much I've learned from these people? Enormous. But because I wasn't Christian, some of these people, not all, but a great deal of their followers would come and check out my work knowing that I'm also into conspiracy. But the moment that they would see that I'm also into astrology and tarot, they would drop me too. So I was a man without a home. I didn't ask for any of this, but I was rejected on both sides. So yeah, it cost me enormously because I couldn't find a home. Almost every other person in this movement they were able to be ingratiated. But the Christians had a knee-jerk reaction the moment that they saw me, being into astrology and tarot, or sometimes questioning the Bible, which I've done in some of my DVDs. They were very close-minded, and so I lost all that audience to this very day. And then I lost the New Age movement because of my honest remarks about them. And this also came from being an insider, because through the 70s and 80s, I was family members, were part of the New Age, and I had to tag along.
I see.
And so I saw something, almost all of it I didn't like personally. And so when I got free and independent of my family, I would, kind of bash it. Because I never saw anything that was recommendable. So, yeah, this cost me. I didn't realize the power that these groups had. So then, somewhere in around about 2008, I was attacked online by Christian right-wing. I don't even like to use that term. They were just fanatics, fundamentalist Christians. Started to hone in on me because of the things I've just said. And, ruthlessly and relentlessly tried to take me down. And that went on for years and years and years. So, yeah, they came under a lot of attack, a lot of censorship.
Yeah. That's crazy. And I've heard similar stories from Ralph as well, too. Obviously, going into his work about questioning the Bible, he's thrown that all upside down, hasn't he? And
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
Well, then they saw that I had this article, and they saw that I had a couple of other anti-Christian articles, and they don't like that. They don't allow that. They think, hey, you're in our territory, which I'm not, and we have the right to then come in and just to destroy your career, destroy your life, which is what they really tried to do. And I'm telling them, the little bit of contact I had, I would say, hey, aren't you meant to be Christians? Don't you forgive? If you don't like something, just go ahead and forgive me then and move on. No.
Turn the other cheek.
Yeah, well, this is not the way it really works. So, yeah. But I was able to withstand it and just carry on and keep doing what I'm doing, thankfully,
Do you almost see it as like a rite of passage, in this kind of work, that you're just going to get attacked from all sides, and maybe that's just part of the plan to sharpen your blade, that this is what you're meant to go through, one of these trials of initiation. Really,
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. Yeah, of course it does. Instead of giving up, you have to decide whether to just give up, or carry on. You can. It makes you realize just how many fools there are in the world, though. Look at the hits on a video of something to do with, say, flat Earth, just to give an example.
Exactly.
Millions, hundreds of thousands of comments on something so utterly preposterous, and yet these sites were super viral. If you compare that with what Ralph gets or what I get, I've been shadow banned, half a dozen times, deplatformed. So the world wants this. And so there's lots of people out there, but they're all into just absolute nonsense. So, yeah, this is one of the most disheartening things, So you have to be very much resolved to carry on regardless, which I've done.
Yeah, no, it's inspiring. Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's one of those things I like about your work. You're more than happy to criticize both sides. You go where the truth leads. It's not which side it makes them happy. You know what I mean? And it's part of this Siddhartha path, isn't it?
Yeah, and I just don't belong. I don't belong. If I had joined the New Age movement and mouthed a lot of the stuff that they like, I'd have been a multimillionaire today. If I'd have faked it and showed a little bit more, sidled up to Christians, just mouthed a lot of their rhetoric, I would have been warmly accepted, and things would have been massively different. But to me, that was to be fake, to be a sham. So the world wants you to be a sham. It demands it. It's very, very difficult to be authentic in this movement and any other place as well. It's just nothing but conformity all the way down the line.
Yeah. And that maybe brings us on a little bit about what the work of Aleister Crowley actually was. So again, this is a bit more quotations from your article. I'll read through a few of these and pass it back over to you. And so, Crowley emphasized that in any age, man's most pressing need is total freedom of thought, action, and belief. The term he employed to describe total emancipation was will, from the Greek thelema. He noted that in esoteric numerology, the Greek words for love and will have the same sum. For occultists, this means the words express the same principle. In a similar vein as his predecessor William Blake, Crowley proclaimed that freedom on all levels was attainable once we dispense with external authority. For Blake and Crowley, man's will is subverted early in life by authoritarian parents and peers. Minds and hearts are dominated by the will of mothers, fathers, relatives, school teachers, friends, priests, and politicians. The spirit within is also violated when we prostitute ourselves by overly relying on external guidance, asking each and every stranger for answers, direction, and support. For Crowley, Blake, and other true mystics, on our spiritual journey, the advice and experience of other people are relatively meaningless. In other words, men do not think with their own minds or feel with their own hearts. On the contrary, their consciousness is colonized. The process of consciousness control occurs gradually over generations and less gradually during the years of a single lifetime. The conditioned, acculturated man more often than not becomes an oppressor of those who fall under his power. Indeed, most humans accept the mind-forged manacles imposed on them, and many quickly move to impose them on others. What is often referred to as community and family amounts to little more than enslavement to the will of others. And so there's a line that jumps out there at me, Michael. It's this one. On the contrary, their consciousness is colonized. And it almost just perfectly ties into what we were just speaking about by joining these different groups. You can join this one colony, you can join that other colony, and maybe that helps you feel, to get away from yourself, to get away from your individuality, to get away from the voice of the will, to lose yourself in the crowd. Have you any thoughts on that, Michael, about this colonization of consciousness or what we've been discussing here?
Yeah, this is, if to understand Crowley specifically as an individual, this is, of course, what he was chiefly against. It's in his chart, his own personal chart. You can see this very strongly. And I think that sort of also makes him so iconoclastic. He wasn't a joiner too. He fell out with the Order of the Golden Dawn. They had a big, lengthy court case, which is actually quite humorous in many ways. And he was a rebel in every sense of the word. But he was also an achiever, sort of a genius type. And as such, he couldn't really be held, in just one sort of a framework. He had to go his own way. And for that, he's quite remarkable, you see. And he was a really 20th century man, but he was still in a sort of Victorian mentality. The world around him was still in an old world modality, and he was future thinking. So obviously there was going to be a clash. Now, I must say that Crowley also had a very, very dramatic side to him, and he did play up to this. He was not only a rebel, but he was he liked the drama. Yeah, he's responsible for a great deal of the diatribes against him because he willfully and actively put himself out there. He'd have been perfect today in our world of celebrities and all of this muckraking. He would have really loved our age, I think, more, because he went around and did things that purposely gained him notoriety. And when he realized he was getting it, he just made it even worse for himself, playing it up. Yeah, and that's just, again, something in his chart. Doesn't mean he was a bad man or anything like that. He just had this flair for the dramatic, and he knew how to get their goat. He knew how to say and do things that would excite the masses. Yeah.
What you mean. And for people who want to dive a bit deeper into it, Colin Wilson, who we mentioned earlier, he actually wrote a biography of Aleister Crowley. And it's a really fascinating book for people who want to know a little bit more about the eccentric side of him, because it's about as eccentric as you can get, really, some of it.
Yeah, that book is by Colin Wilson, is one of the greatest books on the occult ever written. So I really hope that people will get it. I can recommend two other books by the author John Keel, Keel. He wrote a book that I refer to a lot in my work called The Haunted Planet, or Our Haunted Planet. And he wrote a second follow-up to that called The Eighth Tower. So Our Haunted Planet and The Eighth Tower, and Colin Wilson's Occultism. Oh, sorry, The Occult.
The
You
Occult,
got it.
yeah. He
You
did
got it right.
1,
Yeah,
2, and he did a third book on Crowley as well. So yeah,
that's
yeah.
right. He did. Well, just those books there alone, those 3 books, are the finest books you'll ever read on the occult and the paranormal. And they definitely should be read, because if you ever come up against skeptics who just brush this off, those 3 books will be like Bibles to you, in the sense of they're manuals of. They're very much in the mode of Charles Fort, the writer Charles Fort, but they're a lot more accessible than his work, to show you what the hell has been going on this planet. Inexplicable things. They've never been bested. No TV show, no other writings have bested these 3 books. So highly recommend those.
Yeah, they're brilliant. I was thinking of one other book, Science and Psychic Phenomena is another one for people to check out if you're coming across, a bit of pushback from people. That's a good start there too. I'll leave links to a few others down below. So yeah, just about Crowley then here. When you think about him being labeled as the most evil man alive, or the wickedest man living with it, or the great beast, and then you look a bit deeper into his work, and it turns out what he's speaking about is the will and about freedom. That seems so contrary to what the perception of the public is given. Because you'd imagine he's about the most evil things, but surely freedom is one of the best things that an individual could be sort of elevating. This is a divine quality of life, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think he had an idea that controversy will bring him into the public eye, but
Mm.
he forgot that there's these journalists in the way. They're going to manipulate your profile. They're going to manipulate your public image, and he didn't manage it well enough. And also, just don't you see that they loved this? They loved the iconoclasm of the guy, and that he could be raked over the coals. And once it starts, you can't stop it. Nothing he could do. He wrote some beautiful books on poetry. Many of his works are very fine. He was a brilliant, brilliant mathematician, and even anticipated a lot of what was the quantum physicists would discover later. But none of this mattered, you see. They had their whipping boy.
Mm. Yeah, and I'll maybe carry on with another couple of quotes from the article that speaks about his work further here. And so, again, this is from your article. Crowley believed that during the 20th century, men would finally get a real chance to cast off their chains and overthrow the corrupt institutions that impose their will on humanity. Like a caring father, he dedicated his time and energy to the creation of the manifestos of freedom to guide the new eon's unchained but unguided children. Of these works, the Thoth Tarot is his supreme accomplishment. This is especially so given that it employs images rather than words. The turning point in Crowley's life occurred in 1904, while he was in his 20s. He received, by way of his wife, channeled instructions concerning his role on the planet. After an initial series of visions, the Crowleys returned to their home in Bolsheen, Scotland, where he entered into direct communion with the praeter-human intelligence. This incorporeal agency transmitted prophetic visions about the coming age in which humans struggle to free themselves from the psychological and spiritual change imposed by religions and political institutions of previous ages. As a result of his strange mystical experience, and while in trance, Crowley penned the strange and infamous tome Liber al Vel Legis, or Book of the Law. Although it has been denounced and ridiculed, many regard the book as a sacred testament to the coming age. Even just to stop there for a little moment, have you any thoughts, Michael, on what this Book of the Law was, or maybe if you want to speak a little bit about Crowley's initial direct communion with his praetor human intelligence? What are all these things about, Michael? Can you give us a bit of a framework for understanding of that?
Well, it happened through his wife when they were traveling. She started to channel this voice of an angel, so to speak, and he took it very seriously. So they went back to Scotland, where he channeled this first book, that then he is the one who called it the Book of the Law, and it was a channeled work, and that this would be a manual for the coming age of Horus, that he called it the Age of Horus, because he believed in a Trinitarian flow of history, that up until about the early period AD, we had been living under a sort of a matriarchy, and he called it the Aeon of Isis. Then, approximately from the Christian era onwards, to 1905, it was the age of, or the Aeon of Osiris, which was more of a paternalistic model that we were under. And then he said basically from the time of 1905 onwards through the whole of the 20th century and beyond, we're in what he called the age of Horus and the Aeon of Horus. And he saw himself as the high priest of this Aeon, of this period. And he knew that just like anything, it would be probably a pretty bloody thing in the beginning because you're changing some old paradigms. And these old paradigms are not just going to give up of their own and pass away. They're going to want to continue. And so there will be a lot of conflict. And so when he saw world wars, if he had lived to see the hippie era, for instance, or any of these other sort of youth movements, he would have definitely understood this. Definitely. He may not have approved of the methods and the way it went about, but he would have known to probably step back and accept it to a degree, because this was all these birth pangs of the new Aeon, leading to greater freedom. See, we're talking here about the occult. One thing to understand about occultists like him, and there's many others, his mentor Rabelais, and going back to even Cornelius Agrippa, and Madame Blavatsky and these kinds of people, most of the magicians of that nature, and this includes MacGregor Mathers and other people, absolutely essential to understand about their doctrines is they believe that man was born good. Yeah. You can't get anywhere unless you understand this. You may not agree. I mean, I don't particularly agree with this, but, stating as it was to these people, they were born with the idea that man is born good. And so any kind of evil that you see being done in the world is to do with the pathogenic forces outside them. Yeah, they're sworn to this. It has to be parents. It has to be peers. It has to be priests, politicians, and things you can put your finger on. It has to be worldly indoctrination. And that's where to look. It has to be. Yeah, this is a fundamental precept. They were unshakable on this point. Yes, they're agreeing that there's evil in the world, but this is all to do with the forces of repression. And it's very interesting that Aleister Crowley is sort of born around about the time when psychoanalysis is, coming to the fore. And in some ways, he even anticipated Carl Jung, who somewhat in dates came a little bit later than Crowley was already speaking. So there's something to be said there. And in any case, Crowley was well up to speed on human psychology. Unlike Freud, who believed that man is born basically a beast, has evil in his being, inherently, innately, and that if he didn't have civilization, he wouldn't be doing any good at all, right? You have to have imposed acculturation to get man to throw aside the sort of a Mr. Hyde aspects, so that he can be a civilized being. You've got to reverse that with the world's occultists. They fall between science and religion. They don't think that either of those two things answer anything fundamental. Science is never going to answer why you are born in this world, why you, as who you are in yourself, came to be here, or what lies on the other side. And other fundamentals about the nature of the mind and consciousness. It doesn't even work on those. It's not giving answers to those things. In fact, it breeds a kind of a dogma of its own, and it breeds conformity of its own. So some occultists nod to science and go, yeah, we need it for various reasons, but we'd like to see it being improved because it breeds a kind of a dogma of its own, and it is not actually answering the greater questions about the fundamental nature of reality or nature. And then they're looking at religion and saying, look, these guys are looking off-world. They don't even notice the physical world at all. So you got science on one side that is debasing man's earthy nature thinking everything is just dead matter, and material blocks just crashing into each other. How preposterous. How could we ever sign on for that? And then you've got religion that is mostly taking your focus off yourself and off the planet into some supernatural realm that none of which can be really verified and corroborated, you see? So occultism tended to, want to steer a course between these things. Yeah. But again, the fundamental principle is man is good. Therefore, he's got to uncover his goodness. He's got to uncover his connection to the moral universe. It's not a matter of a dead universe around him. It's about something very vital and very living, which has many, many secrets that it's not just openly, disclosing. And so the good man, he is Anthropos, he is Adam Kadmon, and occultism is him discovering his perfection through a period of purification, and spiritual evolution. So this is what Rudolf Steiner, this is what MacGregor Mathers, Aleister Crowley, they all took for Madame Blavatsky, they all took this. And for Crowley, though, specifically, he wanted to commit to the process of perfection, but realizing that you're surrounded by pathological forces that then get introjected, and then this makes you less than good. So you have to, one by one, expunge these principles, these forces, whatever they may be. And if they've become psychic, then again, you have to will your way out of it. You've got to listen to your own true will and get rid of these impositions. This is why I use the term, or this is why I identify him quite closely in some ways with William Blake. But he has a lot in common with Schopenhauer, and Rabelais and others as well in this regard. He was focused on this idea of liberation, because nothing can be achieved when you are utterly dependent on how other people, what they think, say, and do. And he saw the whole of the world being entrapped and enchained this way. And it's becoming the norm. So this is where I think his work is distinguished from other occultists, because his Aeon of Horus was a time of freedom. But he knew that freedom also brings these challenges. And there's part of us that wants to then go back to, who finds freedom somewhat threatening and might want to be re-enslaved again very, very easily. So we have to watch out for all of that. So I think his work is very valuable in that regard.
Yeah, it'll just take me on to the last little slide here with it. This is a final quote from that I have taken down from your article. The imagery of Arcanum 20 in the Thoth Tarot is based on the essence of what Crowley received from his guide. Following in the footsteps of Christian mystic Johann of Fiore, he wrote of how history had a trinitarian structure, as you mentioned previously, Michael. Specifically, there are three great epochs corresponding to 3 periods of the so-called Platonic cycle, which is 25,920 years. This cycle is traditionally divided into 12 divisions, making the famous signs of the zodiac. Now, this is card 20 from the Thoth deck, just here on the right-hand side. We have the previous one from the Rider-Waite deck, which is called Judgment, card 20. Do you want to speak a little bit about the symbolism and the difference of these two? Why did he feel the need to change from card 20 to this new design, which is the Aeon, this Age of Horus, as you described?
Well, it had to do with these visions. He was motivated by not all the changes are authentic. There's one or two things he did that I simply do not agree, and I tell my pupils, to slightly correct them. But there's nothing wrong with this one. He saw something very specific in this card that used to be called Judgment, and one or two others, and I think the changes are very legitimate. Yeah. What's that?
I was going to zoom in a little bit just so people can see it as well too. Again, you break it down further in the article as well, some of the symbolism, but you can see some of this Egyptian stuff coming through as well also. Yeah. Have you any comments
Yes,
just overall on those? Yeah.
yeah, he wanted to incorporate the goddess Isis, who's, but really, she's identified here with the goddess Nut, who is the overarching sky goddess, and you can see her body overarching the child Horus. And Horus holds his finger to his lips, and that makes the symbol of the phi ratio, the Greek letter phi, which is about the secrets. It's also about silence. He who has to enter the Hermetic tradition. So he would write down in a book all these various symbols that he felt were the correspondences that you needed for each card. And he left it to later Frida Harris to paint them. He didn't really suggest the paintings. He just said, these are the symbols that go with these cards. Make of them what you will. You're free to put them together. And that's why she sometimes worked on multiple images and then, discarded some. So what you see there is her putting together these symbols, but Crowley is the one who told her, make sure, that these are the symbols that you incorporate, because that part of it has to be fairly accurate. So he's seeing here the womb-like shape of the birth of Horus and the mysteries that he will also bring into the world. And these are very much an Egyptian image here, of course, because he sees the tarot coming out of Egypt, the great mystery traditions. Earlier on, he mentioned, the Great Pyramids. Yeah, he was very much involved in this, and he believed that some of the sacred totems that he had in his life came from Egypt. He was particularly fascinated by certain stelae, and basically other mythologies. I think all of the Golden Dawn people were fascinated with that period in ancient Egypt.
Yeah. Ancient Egypt comes up a lot in this study, doesn't it? Like, yeah.
Yes.
Same with Ralph's work as well, too. But yeah.
I have an article called, Origins of the Tarot, the Major Arcana, and I argue that the Major Arcana is definitely Egyptian. People can agree or disagree with that.
And just a quick question about channeling. What are your thoughts on channeling then as a method? Is this people who are, again, I guess this is sort of voice, or I sort of see it as, again, we spoke previously quite a bit about psychology. We have the conscious mind, we have the ego, we have the unconscious, and then we have that deeper layer of it, of the collective unconscious. Do you see channeling as a methodology of people getting into a certain psychological state that allows this sort of barrier or between the conscious and the unconscious to weaken a bit? That censorship to sort of dull slightly so that voices or information can come in through from this deeper layer of the collective unconscious, and then people work with that. Is that kind of how you see it, Michael, or have you any comments on that? Yeah.
Definitely. In the first slide we showed of those 3 categories, the middle one I called the bicameral age. And this relates exactly to what you're talking about. You see, before 3000 BC, we didn't have the kind of consciousness that we have now. And we did not introspect. This is according to Julian Jaynes, the great psychologist, right?
Yeah, it's big. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And meaning that we did not have put it this way, the voice in our heads that we hear every day, every minute of the day, wasn't our own voice. Very few people ever even think about these things. When you listen to your own mind, you hear your voice. You hear what you take to be yourself. But in the bicameral period, there was a different situation in which human beings heard what can be described as auditory hallucinations. And these were voices, auditory hallucinations. And we took them for the voices of the gods, right? Quote unquote. And this may have been going on for thousands of years. And Julian Jaynes walks you through all of this in his one book that he wrote on it. Now, around about moving in up to the 3rd and 2nd millennium, things started to change. And the voices started to recede, during this Homeric period. And he's able to look at the works of Homer and show you a curve between the Iliad and the Odyssey. That even between the writing of those 2 books, something enormous has taken place in consciousness, and the heroes in the work are starting to think for themselves, starting to introspect. whereas they were not doing that before. Now, this is a colossal theory, but it answers your question. And I even added it in, you see, as one of the ways to explain the occult. Say you scratch the first one about the pre-Adamites. This is a second theory that I think then needs to be brought to the table with a separate committee, to talk about, a separate debate. Because divination and the occult is a phenomena that occurs, that grew up, that became necessary as the voices of instruction of the gods, these auditory hallucinations, started to fade. And when man could no longer hear them, he got into a panic because all he knew was the instruction of the gods. They were in every part of his life. They were the ones that showed him how to do the farming, and told him how to build and to build the temple. And basically everything that mattered to him was part of this instruction. And Julian Jayne makes an extraordinary case, you see, for this. But my focus is that when the voices of instruction started to fade or crackle and became harder and harder to hear, man in his panic started to do certain things in order, in his own mind, to restore the voices of the gods, to bring them back. And this is where we get into the whole idea of various ceremonies and rites to propitiate and placate the gods. Because one of the dominant feelings was that we've angered the voices, we've angered the gods. And so this is where you get human sacrifice coming in for the first time in all the races of the world. Bloody human sacrifices. And all the millions of rites associated with that. It's quite elaborate. And often they were all through the year. Meticulous rites. Even the bringing out of dead corpses and walking them through the town on litters, providing food for the dead. Almost everything we know about the burial of the dead, mummification, burials, and all the rites that go with that have to do with this. Because for a while, they believed that through the dead, it was like a kind of necromancy, the voices came back in the proximity of the dead. And this brings up why skulls were worshipped, especially in Ireland, but also in South America, skull worship. Because at a certain phase of this period, icons and votaries, little statuettes, became means of hearing the gods. I know it sounds weird, but this is what happened. And everybody then would have a little altar in their house. Because there was a time when the gods spoke through the priest and through the temple, officials at the temple, when they weren't speaking to us directly. But even when that started to fade, people started to have sacred stones, sacred statuettes, and even the skulls of the dead and the bones of the dead. And this is where you get relics and icons that even turns up in the Christian world. This is where it all comes from. In fact, this is where prayer comes from, right? All these different means to say if we do this, this, and the other, the voices will return. And it's quite elaborate. I've spoken about it a lot on Enslaved, gone into detail about all the things that ancient man was doing. But for our conversation, I'll just keep it brief. This is the origin of religion, but it's also the origin of divination, oracles. Yeah, the rise of the priest class is entirely due to this. Because if God wasn't speaking to you directly, if the gods weren't speaking to you directly, maybe they'll speak through the head man, and then the head man will talk to us. And for a while, this did work. Because, of course, the priest is going to say, yeah, the gods are talking to me, even when they're not. He likes the power, right? This is what happened. Sometimes I bet you the priest was the last one to be hearing the gods because he knew what to do. But even when the gods' voices faded, even from the priest class, the priests weren't going to let everyone know that this is the case. And they're going to come up with a lot of nonsense. So the nonsense in religion, all the stupid rites and ceremonies, are these priests going, what do we do now, Doc? What are we going to tell them? And so books were written, scripts were written, the great texts, like the Talmud, were being written. All the nonsense of religion starts being manufactured at this time to bamboozle the people. The book of Deuteronomy, if you get into it, the whole thing in Judaism, In fact, I would say that almost everything in Judaism and everything in Christianity is born out of this panic. Because when the voices of the gods passed away, now you're relying on the head man, and this is also where you start to rely on the high priestess figure in the form of these oracles. And most of them were probably totally charlatans, for all you know. Or at least what they did was they started getting high on cannabis, and mescaline, and on these Amanita
Psychedelics.
muscaria. Yeah, it was all drug-related, right? So this is how they palmed it off. But back to the magical arts. What do you think they are? When the voices of the gods were gone and you would do anything to get them back, this is how part of our brain started to say, well, we've got to look for signs. Signs in the sky, signs in the sand, signs on the back of a turtle, signs in the palm of my hand. Right? Throw some runes, throw some stones, cut out some entrails of, a chicken, and in the patterns of that, read some fucking tea leaves, right? All of what we know about esotericism and the magical arts comes from this need to try and re-incant the gods, to bring their favor, to bring their voices back. So idol worship, building of other temples and sacred sites. This actually started with mounds of the dead, by the way, big conical mounds. When Ralph Ellis talks about the great conical mounds that you find in Syria and the Middle East and places, that's what they originally were. Even the pyramid is that. The pyramid is an elaborate building, hoping that, the voices of the gods will be heard inside or on the top or what have you. We went to great lengths to propitiate the gods.
Yeah, I think Ralph, I think he spoke about Göbekli Tepe. I think his theory is it's a mausoleum, interestingly.
A necropolis.
A necropolis, that's the phrase.
Yeah,
for it,
but the part that he doesn't have is the fact that when you brought all these corpses together in one place, and of course they had many necropolises around here, if you sat there at certain periods, you would be able to hear the voices of the gods in your head again. Yeah, this I think what was so elaborate. All of these rites and rituals, and it was all over the world. All mankind did basically the same thing. But when it wasn't happening, the panic grew, the trauma grew, and all sorts of crazy-ass things started to grow up that we thought worked. Everyone had their own idea. This is how astrology was born, because if you happen to watch this, the right things happening. Even John Dee was doing this with his colleagues. Even in the Elizabethan period, they were still doing this. They thought they were seeing signs in the sky that was going to bring in a new age. They called themselves the Cassiopeans. So this, our own looking up to the clouds, our own looking up in terms of prayer, all the churches, right? It's all around us to this day. But what we've forgotten is the things that I'm talking about. Now, as the time passed, and none of this was working, a new level of what basically happened is that consciousness itself changed. Instead of hearing voices of the gods, we heard another voice. And that's the voice we hear today. It's the voice of our own being, so to speak, right? Speaking to us metaphorically inside our own heads. Yet if you open a skull or a head, you don't find any place that this voice is coming from. You'll
find a little man inside, yeah.
No little man, there's no homunculus.
Not with the levers. Yeah.
No. And even if there was, who's inside his head?
Exactly.
It becomes an infinite regress. So this is how Julian Jaynes got onto this stuff we're not going to talk about here, but it had to do with language and metaphor. Becomes important in this. But to keep it short, sweet, it's just that now we have a running dialogue, all right. The brain is capable of doing that, but it's substituted this singular monad, this single voice, except of course in people like schizophrenics. There's an issue there, right? We do know cases of a multiple personality disorder and schizophrenia where people hear other voices, and that may or may not be connected to that. And then all the way back to what your point was about channeling. How do we not know that when people talk about channeling, this is a return to the bicameral period? It's quite likely, because it's only a very short time ago that this introversion, this introspection started. It's actually quite new, and we're still not very familiar with it. In fact, most people don't like it. We want instruction. Why do you think we create AI? You and I have talked about this before. Why do you think we've created this transhumanistic movement? Transhumanism and AI is entirely based on getting another voice of the God to tell you what to do. It's rooted in ancient times. All technology is. Way before Isaac Newton, right? Another one, this is one of the things that Julian Jaynes didn't talk about. But the thing is that our entire raison d'etre for technology is all based in this original primitive dependency on the voice of an authority and our hankering to get back to the bicameral period.
Do you see this end of the bicameral period, of the end of the voice of the gods? Is this when man's anxiety started and he felt this, this existential separation between nature, himself, and the world?
Yes.
Is that when you put it down there?
This created a sort of a primal vertigo, a primal nausea. The world was no longer a friendly place in which everything was laid out in a nice, orderly grid fashion. And remember, you get a psychological kick out of obeying the God and then having reward. The God speaks to you more. The God offers you particular reward. The God makes your tribe win over another tribe. There are certain perks. But the most important thing is these voices of the gods oriented you as a weak, fragile individual in a cosmos that was unimaginably threatening and frightening. Once those voices of the gods receded, you were left like a little mannequin, a totally vulnerable plaything of the universe. Yeah. And you lost your way. And you're exactly right. This caused a sense of a fall. This was the original fall.
Original sin, yeah.
The original sin. Yeah, and you've done something bad, and you can't and for a while, when I think that people did do rituals, the voices of the gods would come back a little bit. I think there was a period of time when they really believed that you have to do these rites very, very assiduously because it seems to work. Just like in the same way, say, if you sacrifice the king and you sacrifice a major figure or sacrifice a virgin, whatever they were into, and it's quite horrendous, some of it. But this was all the idea to get the voices of instruction to come back. But strangely, the human fate was that they weren't coming back. In the end, they started to fade. Julian Jaynes doesn't give a real reason why that was. It just happened. And the introspective quality, which we are familiar with now, and see, I think even the splitting of the brain is to do with this, or at least one aspect of the splitting of our brains, where the left brain takes over from the right brain, because these voices would have been housed in the right brain. So when you're working with the tarot and when you're working with any kind of divination, any kind of magic in the broadest sense, that's what you're doing. When you make prayers, when you make incantations, when you draw a pentagram, when you draw a magic circle, when you deal with sigils, when you do things under certain astrological conjunctions and aspects, all of this is coming from this period. And this is not even getting into the whole separate conversation of whether any of this works or not, right? No. We're just looking into its origin. I told you that I'm interested in its origins, not the ceremonial practices themselves, individually. That's interesting, but I prefer to look at the origins of the whole phenomena of it and what might be hidden from us. But the trouble is, you see, it plugs in not just to channeling. It plugs into when you asked earlier the question a few minutes ago about collectivism, it's the same thing. If I don't have a God speaking inside my head, I'll turn the crowd into a God. I'll turn the politician and the demigod and the warlord into that authority. It'll be Adolf Hitler. And if it turns out that the demagogue that I am following, that I'm making myself subservient to, knows some of this, right, is instructed to know about the bicameral period and about the voices in the head and how we look to what we're looking for. Don't you see how they can use that? So when you're looking at the Chinese or the Nazis or the communists, when you're looking at a cult leader, the John of God or whatever, what is actually going on here? Why would that phenomenon even exist? Why do people who should know better prostrate their will, and the rest of us, are looking at these people and go, "Are you fucking crazy?" Oh, and by the way, this is even in the church to a priest or to a priest class. My God, the whole of our world, like Crowley and Blake knew, is priest-ridden. They didn't go away. The bicameral voices may have gone away, but the echo of those voices and the promise that they'll return if you oblate to the priest, because he was in your mind, in the phylogenetic memory, the priest was really the last
Gateway to God. Yeah.
Yeah, he was the last echo chamber. The voices last spoke through him, so he still has this aura, this numinous aura, and it's hard to shake off.
The way I kind of see it is, when we speak about why worship the idols, there is this projection, this psychological mechanism before you project what's inward onto the outward with it, and you go, oh, well, maybe I can still project some of these inner voices onto these idols, and it's that relationship with it that stimulates it once more. They're symbols, and so they percolate and stimulate something in the unconscious to come through. And I guess the kind of way I see it is that the ego has been evolving over these thousands of years, and it's been changing, and therefore its relationship to the unconscious has been changing, as well as that sort of wall of permeation that separates the two. And I think some of the point of these rituals it's to try to just create an atmosphere for the ego or consciousness or the state of mind to shift, so that the content of the unconscious comes through in a different way. Part of the occult is working in this manner to do what's called the great work that I believe I hear mentioned, and it's about channeling the higher self to come through, and it's about going into these states for it. However, conversely to that, this is sort of what I think with all these satanic pedophiles sort of stuff that's sort of, apropos to what's going on today, is they go and do these other kind of evil rituals in order to, I guess, stimulate a different part of the unconscious to come through to the ego, because I guess they get some sort of power from it. Have you any sort of comment on that overall, Michael? Do you see this as an evolution of consciousness? How do you see these sort of rituals changing? Or what's the great work, maybe, is my question. What is this sort of whole business about contacting a higher self that is written in these occult books?
Well, let's go back to last week or the time when we spoke about transhumanism. And I happened to mention to you that there are enclaves within even the religious world that believe that God is yet to come. Right? Strange theory, but it was, you have it all chalked out by somebody like Teilhard de Chardin. Again, it's all born out of the same thing. That which was lost in the past can and must be regained. Think of the pathological mind that has held on through the millennium to this one formula. See, we look at all the myriad kaleidoscopic events of history and we get lost in it. It's very hard for us to think about one thought being held above all in our unconscious. That the entire unconscious is motivated. Is it a womb symbol? Is it a surrogate womb thing that we're looking for? What is it? Right? Well, Julian James's work helps us understand what this is. And in society today, the people at the top who run society, they know that this exists, this very deep set need, almost primal need for that authority, that voice, that booming voice. But they also know that there's a lot of people who don't quite need it. So what is the best thing? The more fragile and waylaid, the more waylaid a person is, the more fragile their grip on reality, the more they'll need that voice. We have replaced it with the self, and that should be enough. Why worry about bygone days? And so the more adjusted worldly person, that's where they're at. But the lords of the world don't want that. So their formula is to make the person more scared, more fragile, and more nauseous, more inferior when it comes to dealing with reality. And the more infantile that they can make you, the more you're going to need the voice of instruction. So it's a formula that they work on all the time. They're not thinking really about the evolved self who's going to resist all of this and says, well, I don't need that anymore. They're working on people who do. And the world is made up of these docile bodies who need the governmentality, and they're right for the big supercomputer or the God or whatever way you want to look at it, because this deep, deep inner desire explains it. It explains why the crowd does what it does. It explains why demagogues and warlords exist, why priests exist, and why finally, some chip in the brain, something transhumanistic is going to replace, and then we'll be happy. And so in advertising, if you know what you're looking at, they're constantly using symbols of the bicameral period. Constantly. There's a certain, set of symbols. We talked about how important it is earlier to know about symbol literacy. But they know how to work on reminding you through symbolism of this period when you did not think for yourself. And the moment that they put symbols like that around, we are immediately mesmerized, even if we don't realize it. Everything stops. Everything stops in our consciousness. Because this is, the great script that they can wheel out. Life was easier when we didn't think, when we didn't have to rely on our own will. And by the way, even in all the years in which, mankind has had to use his will, it's been nothing but trauma. It's been nothing but problems and pain and suffering. So the overlords understand that in most people today, there's a deep distrust of freedom, a deep hatred of selfhood. And you just need to poke at it. Make sure one group of your people, is every single day, every single minute working on weakening it. These positivists, these scientific materialists, telling you there's no meaning in anything, right? They're all working on, that's what materialism really is when you break it down. Materialism is nothing but a way of divorcing you from the moral universe. Trying to show you that your selfhood is not rooted in anything spiritual, that there's no God, there's nothing there at all of anything wholesome, in order to make you so fragile, so wanting, so discombobulated, you see, that you're ready and you're waiting. You are the epitome of the docile body. They've got to have the whole of mankind like that, so that you become more tribal, so that you become more regressed. And so that finally you'll end up going more back to the churches. We're going right back more to the churches, because in the churches are these icons, these votaries, right? Light a candle to the Lady of Guadalupe or whoever it is, right? Go back to your idol worship, start praying to the supernatural force, and it's going to pay off, because the voice is coming back. This is not something that they're not going to deliver on. All this technology is not for nothing. They are not wasting all this time. They're not working on the organic computer and the brain implant for nothing. Yeah. Everybody in this world should be reading Julian James's book, because you're living in something that's happening outside your periphery of your vision. It's a manual. And even though he's been deridden as a pseudoscientist or whatever, publicly, don't be fooled by that.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. The controllers know exactly what they're doing.
Yeah, it's a really exceptional book. I'm actually about halfway through it, and I've set it down because I thought I need to take time to go through this further. But it's about this exploration about the origin of consciousness, and it is unbelievable. Every page of it you could stop and do a whole show on. So right. It's something we'll have to do a further show on, just the work of Julian James for sure. But you were speaking. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Michael.
But it connects to your question about selfhood. The remedy of this is selfhood. You don't need another voice in your head or any instruction if you can rely on the imperial self within you. The very last thing that the controllers want. That's why they send you to school early, right? That's why a lot of things are happening. That's why the kids are on their cell phones just gawking at them morning, noon, and night, that cell phone is going to be, eventually instructing you on everything that you want to do in life.
Will be implanted in you. Yeah,
Probably
no
implanted.
doubt.
Yeah. We're heading straight for that. And people will not be forced. They'll be lining up. They've been tenderized from it with all the video games and what have you, done for a long, long time. And they've also been equally warned about it by other magnificent movies and stuff, but nobody's listening. So the remedy to it is, of course, self-food. But who are the people around who are helping you develop your self-esteem? Who are the teachers around that are helping you delve into the significance of a self? Carl Jung was, right? Ayn Rand was. There are a few others here and there, but generally speak, Crowley was. That's why I think he's a great man, and I wrote my article on it.
Yeah.
There's more to the article than we got into, so people should read it. But it's very, very rare. What is the anatomy of self-food? It is actually the thing you're going to need, because it did replace the voices of the gods. You've got it. And that's why I'm so against channeling and taking ayahuasca or any other drugs, because all this is doing is opening yourself up to the bicameral period again. It's weakening self-food, not strengthening it. And it is, remember I said that we've adapted many, 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 many means of trying to restore the voices of the gods? Well, we're still doing it today in all these inauthentic ways. We still want some shaman down in Costa Rica, you see, to be a spokesman for us. We've got the wrong end of the stick. And we've mistaken this for spirituality. Because once upon a time, it was spirituality. So each person has to sit down and study this for themselves. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is exactly what people want. Maybe this is exactly what the spirituality was. Maybe that's what a lot of occultism was. Occultism is based on practices, right? No matter what they are, which was again an idea that if I draw this magic circle, the gods will speak to me. If I do this at a certain hour, if I, boil this frog, if I do these rites, if I wear these talismans and amulets, right? If I cast the runes, whatever, the gods will speak to me. So maybe I'm the one who's got it all wrong. Maybe individuality is a terminal thing. It was a crutch. It's not ultimately wanted. Yeah. And we are all signing on. We may make a few protestations on the surface, but deep down inside, if we could have selfhood removed from us and be instructed again in these smart cities. I mean, just look at Chinese society. Is it really that far-fetched? So I'm glad you asked about that, because those 3 points I think are key. If a man is good, then he wants to learn about that goodness. He wants to uncover the mysteries of himself and the moral universe. Therefore, you have occultism. It could be a way to restore knowledge of a golden age that was taken from us abruptly, and like a smashed mirror, all these wonderful teachings and traditions were smashed up into millions of pieces. We're trying to put it all together, glue it all back. And that's what occultism is. Or it's a throwback to the bicameral period. I don't have the answer. I just present these 3, because in my research through the years, I've isolated these as being the most important. And that doesn't mean that now you exclude everything else that could be said about it. But through the years, these are the 3 outstanding categories that I put this subject into, when it comes to the origins of the occult.
Yeah, we're coming up to the 2-hour mark again here, so this has been an unreal episode. I've been looking to do this for a while, and I've about 100,000 other questions to go off. One of them that was immediately coming through to me, but maybe we'll save this for the next chat, was I was wondering if your thoughts of the end of the voice of the gods and this separation of man from nature was what allowed the superego to then develop, maybe, and then that started to allow man to manipulate nature more, and this is the birth of science and of tools further, and this is this extrapolation that's exploded more recently. But we've a lot of different tracks to go down here, so I'll maybe stop there for this week. Is there any last comment you want to make, Michael? Or go ahead.
Well, I'll just make a quick comment on that. The superego is the best modern stand-in for the voice of the gods, because it's still a voice,
Absolutely.
And in our ontogenetic life, who are the gods? Is our parents. So the voice of the gods then becomes our parents, naturally. Right? And once upon a time, we heard voices of other gods, disembodied voices that we don't even know if they are gods. They were just voices in our head that we took for the gods, this inner instruction. But we will replace that with the voice of the parents and stick to it. We want to become them. And the means of doing that, taking their instruction, because we have to, we're vulnerable children, vulnerable infants, is the superego. Now, luckily, there's still enough self-will later on, starting around teenage years, to start questioning it. Yeah, that does exist. That's the will. That's the individual self that says maybe, hey, I don't trust this anymore. Or maybe I've gone out to the world and had a bit of experience and I've listened to others and they're saying things that are countering what my parents said. Or maybe I just see how idiotic these parents are. They do things that are very contradictory and unwholesome. And also I can see that their lives aren't really working for them. I don't want to live like them. So you can actually, luckily, unseat these voices. And that comes with a part that's attached to the superego, Freud said, called the ego ideal. So right within our own head, in the complex of the ego, we have something that can also unchain us from the voices of the parents through what's known as the ego ideal, which scans the world for better ideals, for heroes. Right? But heroes are connected to what I talked about earlier about self-esteem. Remember when I said that all men are good? This connects to that. Because when you embody this idea that all men are good, you automatically then want to identify with good men. And good men are heroic men. And you actually have a part of your consciousness, thank God you do, called the ego ideal, that when it's working correctly, it scans the world for heroic beings that are able to overcome, right, and move into a superior mode of being. And the more and more that you learn to identify them, the less and less you're going to identify with some stupid failure asshole parents for all their posturing. Unless your parents are heroic, then it's all good and you'll grow up very, very normal. But most of us do not have heroic parents. Most of us don't even have a father in the family anymore. You see? So this all breaks down. But luckily, the ego ideal seeks out. Now, if the parents are good parents, they will bring a lot of heroic figures, through storybooks and movies and music into your life. But of course, again, that's becoming something that's less and less. And then when you move out into the world, unfortunately, it can break down because our world, the media, has only been bringing mostly transgressive characters into view. So we're not meeting truly heroic figures. They even take heroic figures and sort of, darken them, make them much more sort of ambivalent. You're not getting, heroic figures that are really pure anymore. They've been adulterated. This has all been done by design by some very, very clever people who know exactly what they're doing in these Marvel comics and just in general. So when you get in
control, know this.
Oh yes, you see, this is what I've been trying to bring into my work, and I'm alone in this. Bringing the psychology into the conspiracy, I'm about the only person who does it. And do it well. Do it that you can be verified. It's a tremendous work. And it's resisted by everyone. You asked earlier about difficulties and challenges. I'd say the greatest challenge of all has been this. People resisting, people who should know better, people who should know that they're architects of control, what tools they've got and what weapons they're using. And yet they absolutely insist on resisting this very information that reveals the truth about that subject and what weapons they're using, which taught me that there's we're living in an anti-psychological society. But nevertheless, it taught me that this is the answer. It doesn't matter about other people's resistance. That's a separate thing. You just get used to that.
Yeah. I can tell the follow up on this discussion is going to be fantastic. I know already. So I'm going to leave everybody in a bit of a cliffhanger. We'll end it for there, Michael, if that sounds all right.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, no, it's definitely going to be one of the main focuses of this channel is this psychology of this consciousness. It's, it's bringing it to the forefront and then understanding these mechanisms that the architects of control used to enslave us, and it's about undoing those. So yeah, that's a bit of a vision for the channel going forward. And so yeah, just speaking on that again, this is a brand new channel. Again, I really wanted to make it something where I can focus on it and spend a lot more time dedicating it towards. So if people wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, it's a massive help. And please check out all of Michael's books and all of his articles. Again, we're going to leave lots of links down below. You can find Michael over on Unslave, where he's went much more deeply into these topics with the great David Whitehead as well too. And so yeah, that's going to do us for another week. Thank you very much once more, Michael. I really appreciate your time. Yeah, it's been brilliant. And yeah, I guess we'll see you all next time. Cheers, mate. Good stuff.